Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dennis Spaglow. I'm the Aquatic Resources Program Manager for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and the chair of our Western Regional Panel. And thank you for attending all week, and to our great presenters and moderators and facilitators. And today we're going to jump into our business meeting, so last day of a good week. So again, thank you for your participation and all the great presentations this week. I don't have a PowerPoint or anything today. I know sometimes we kind of recap some things, but it's been a tough few weeks for me, so I apologize. Many of you know I had to evacuate due to wildfire, and so was kind of out of pocket for about a month. So I do apologize, but I'll just kind of mention a few things and maybe let you go early today and then start enjoying the weekend and having a cocktail on a Friday afternoon. But you know, it's been an interesting year for sure, right? I think we all thought we would be together somewhere, whether that was in Alaska or Utah. But I think I mentioned when we started on Tuesday that we all hope to be there, but such is the case of the current situation in the world. So here we are again virtually, but I think it's been really another successful virtual meeting. I think last year's went really well, and again this year. So thanks to everybody that helped put this together. I mentioned the planning team on Tuesday, and so a lot of great work that went into all of that, and really all the work that we've been able to accomplish. It seems like everyone I talked to over this last year and a half just seems to be really overloaded with work, and I'm not sure if that's a result of COVID and having to shift different priorities, working from home for the most part, what that's done to people, but it just seems like everyone has their bandwidth has been really taken advantage of. So it's really impressive that the work that can still continue when everyone seems to be overloaded. So I think that just is a great representation of all the hard work and dedication all of you have, and so that's really appreciated. And I think we're being asked of a lot more. We've had a lot of success. We've demonstrated what we can do with little resources at times, but also the leadership we provide. I mentioned with our various committees, but also working with the task force and the committees they've developed with prevention and control and monitoring and research, the participation we show there as well. And so we've demonstrated our value. So I think we're being asked of and being sought out as leaders in aquatic invasive species management. So that's just I think you should all be proud of everything you're doing. So thank you. And I wanted to thank our executive committee, all the great work that they do, and maybe just give a special shout out to Allison Zach from University of Nebraska. She'll be completing her term on the XCOM after this next round. So thank you for all your hard work and the advancements you've made with WISCI, our Western Invasive Species Coordinating Effort, a fun name I'm very fond of, but also with the Outreach Committee. Really great work there. So thank you for everything you've done. And I'd like to, we'll have a new person as part of XCOM. We'll hear from Leah with results from the elections, but really want to encourage you to participate. It's been I continue to serve, as far as being chair, but also serving on the executive committee. It's been really rewarding for me, just not only being able to work in a leadership capacity, but working with really great, smart people. So I would really encourage all of you to participate and seek opportunities to either become a member of the executive committee or a member of a committee or chair a committee. It's good to have fresh ideas and fresh faces, but also having that continuity of people that have served for some time. So it's good to have a balance. So please consider participating in a leadership role. We really want people's ideas and outlooks on things. So I encourage you to do so. And then we'll talk about the QZAP here next, but we're also going to hear today from all of those committees that we have and the work that they've done and the progress that they've made. So really looking forward to seeing all that and hearing that from them to demonstrate all the great work, as I mentioned, that's being done. So thank you very much. And here's to a great last day. And again, just really have all my gratitude. So keep up the great work. And Leah, if you want to address any housekeeping items before we jump into QZAP.
Sure. For those of you that have been joining every day, this is kind of a repetition, but I know I've gotten quite a few questions about recordings of the webinars this week. So as quick as possible, I'm going to have those up on the Western Regional Panel's YouTube channel. And that's probably going to be by midweek next week. So go check that spot out then. And if you have any questions about that, just reach out to me. So because, right, of course, this is a business meeting, it's a little bit different than the last few days, but if you do have questions, please pose those and we will do our best to address those during the time we have today here online. And then 2 more items, I will be sending out a survey about the week and your thoughts about 2022 and meeting. And then again, if anybody that hasn't heard this already too, if you want to be on the listserv, just reach out, send me an email, and be happy to get you on that so you can keep up and up on what the WRP is doing. So those are my few comments for starting today. And so I guess it's back to you, Dennis.
All right. Can you let me share my screen? I'm not able to.
Sure.
Button's grayed out. There we go. Let's see. Are you seeing the presentation?
Looks great.
Okay. All right. So QZAP 2.0, priorities and next steps. It's been a quite a journey on QZAP, starting over a decade ago, and then getting to the point of updating it and being able to demonstrate all the progress we've made on the first round in 1.0, but then all the work that went into developing this. Big thanks to Elizabeth Brown that really led the charge on this, presenting it to the task force and having their blessings, and now moving into a phase where we're going to try to take action on those action items. So let's take a look at some of those elements. So in February, we went out to our membership and asked you to participate in surveys to prioritize those action items that fall under various categories of prevention and education and outreach and research and all of those aspects. I believe there's 6 or 7 different areas within QZAP that identify different action items. So there was multiple opportunities for participation there, but unfortunately we only got 17 responses from the membership. So it's a little discouraging, but like I said, I know we're all very busy and overloaded. So this is an opportunity to weigh in on some of the results of that prioritization effort, and then an invitation to continue to submit your ideas and thoughts on the action items and the priorities that have been identified to date. So overall, there's not a lot of these action items that we can physically or really take control of. It relies on a lot of coordination, a lot of decisions by federal agencies or decision makers at various levels. So a lot of these action items will really rely a lot on advocacy. So making sure we're talking about these in various settings that we participate in, whether it's WAFWA or OFWA or task force or other collaborative partnerships that we're part of. So we just want to mention this work on a continual basis. And so we'll be asking all of you to do so when you're participating in these and when you're being asked of what is the priorities of the Western Regional Panel, this is your opportunity to address these and bring these to light. So there's a lot of that. All almost everything identified has some level of advocacy, but others where there's opportunities to have other platforms, we're trying to identify that as well. And so what we have here was the highest priorities under increasing capacity to prevent and manage invasive species, establish long-term stable source of multi-year funding. That's not something we can just do. We don't have that ability to just create money or prioritize, or I'm sorry, approve appropriations for different things. And so we'll be advocating for that, but also working with Barack from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the QZAP grant and developing a process where the priorities of the Western Regional Panel are made known and finding opportunities within the QZAP grant to fund those efforts. And so with the A3, having states maintaining and increasing or establishing authorities, it's an opportunity to update our legal framework as well. And then states should establish or increase capacity for implementation of watercraft inspection and decontamination stations, operational procedures, protocols, and standards. That's another area for advocacy, but also an opportunity if someone is looking to do that or a program is looking to do that, perhaps QZAP grant could be an opportunity to advance that. There we go. So those previous ones I mentioned were the highest ranked action items. These were also received some attention, but we'll call it a medium priority, developing a strategic federal funding system with state agencies in coordination with the feds, and then establish, support, and coordinate new basin teams and plans. There could be some working groups that could be formed to address this, and then of course continued coordination with the Department of Interior. And then perhaps an opportunity to develop a Colorado River Basin team is something that's been mentioned as a possibility. So that's something that the membership and the executive committee can delve into to find out what the likelihood of forming a basin team is. Strategy B, prevention and containment, the highest ranking priorities that came out is implementing or continuing to implement our WID efforts, and especially containment procedures for infested waterways, and then establishing new or continued WID stations on highways to provide protection between the uninfested West and the Colorado River Basin. I'm sorry, the infested West and the western areas that are uninfested, and the I'm sorry, jumbled my words a little bit there, but I think you understand where I'm coming from or what that's intended to address. And so these are opportunities for QZAP funding, I believe. And so again, we'll work with Barack to identify where some of these things are, but also in some of the other efforts that we'll identify through traffic patterns and things like that, where the best opportunities are to develop some of these. And there's also potential word of funding, perhaps, there's also quite a bit of discussion at the federal level with infrastructure. I know here in Tahoe, infrastructure has been identified as some funding that would be focused for aquatic invasive species. And I think that could be expanded all over the West with potential infrastructure funding that could be used to develop some of these on-highway inspection stations. Some of the medium ranking priorities: develop and implement programs to inspect, decon, and intercept commercially hauled watercraft or conveyances, and then ensure quality control of WID stations in accordance with the building consensus effort that we completed a few years ago. With the commercial haulers, that's something we've been talking about quite a bit, had some coordination with the Great Lakes panel, and is there an opportunity to develop some specific targeted outreach in different platforms? I think Boat Trader is one of the publications we've thought about, but then we've also heard from some previous efforts through the Minnesota Sea Grant, Doug Jensen, some of the work that he's done in the past, so we can perhaps build on that to to address these action items. And then with the quality controls, that's something the Decon think tank can tackle. We'll have to work with them to see where there's some opportunities there to help develop a QA/QC plan. For detection monitoring and for quagga and zebra mussels, what fleshed out as some of the highest priorities: adopting a Dracaena mussel field sampling and protocol, lab standards for veliger analysis. Perhaps that's another committee that can address that. So we'll be seeking some input on the development of a new committee that could be developed to address these things. But then also expanding early detection monitoring programs. That's another opportunity perhaps for funding from QZAP to be able to build that. Medium ranking priorities, creating a Western sampling location web map. That's something perhaps we can work with Wes Daniels and USGS to take advantage of existing platforms, and then hosting an annual coordination forum to communicate those activities. And perhaps that's something that new committee could also take on and provide updates, perhaps at a forum such as this, annual meeting of the Western Regional Panel. For rapid response, developing and maintaining rapid response plans for all Western states and major basins. Quite a few programs and states have done that already. So can we use those existing plans to develop a template to help others not reinvent the wheel? And perhaps that's an existing committee or a new committee, but also just reaching out to our partnerships when that has been identified, or what programs have developed these already, and there's an opportunity to have a more direct partnership with those entities and work with our various committees already that potentially could develop that template. And then also from a medium ranking standpoint, maintain rapid response fund, can follow up with the Department of Interior, with Hildery's work and Stosh's work previously. Is there opportunities to develop or build a rapid response fund for zebra and quagga mussel discoveries? And then also rapid response training. And is that an opportunity also for funding from QZAP? Not trying to tap all of the resources of QZAP, but these are just potential ideas. Not all of these things will happen at once. They'll definitely take time. And so when we do have rounds of QZAP being released, we'll want to work with the membership, the executive committee, and Barack to identify or provide information to him that lets him know what our priorities are to ensure that these elements are being addressed in a prioritized fashion. For research and control and management, conducting a Western traffic assessment to determine corridors most commonly used. I kind of referred to this previously. That was a recommendation to the task force at the last meeting and is being addressed currently. This recommendation was given to the prevention subcommittee of the task force, and so James Ballard with GSARP is the Gulf State Regional Panel has reached out to work with us to build on this action item. So we're working with him to find out what we can do to address this, and he's actually asked us to help participate in their next meeting of that prevention committee to see how we can tackle this. So I think that's a good example of how our recommendations are actually getting traction. And then medium priority, developing a standardized risk assessment model. There's some other action items that would need to happen first, but also we heard from Tim Cunahan earlier this week, and coordinating with him to see where there's an ability to take what he's done and build from that to address this action item. And then outreach and education. promote the use of consistent, effective messaging and enhance coordination efforts to support desired behavior change. That's an actual ongoing, that's a currently being worked on action item by the Education Outreach Committee. So we'll get some outcomes of that that will help address this action item. So I think they actually received money from QZAP to do this work. So that's all I have. It's kind of a quick run through of everything, but I hope that most of you have, over the last couple of years, looked at the QZAP document 2.0 document. A lot of you have did great work to provide the necessary information to develop that document. And so I guess, Leah, if there's any comments or questions, we can address those here. And let me know if we have any.
I don't see any questions yet, but please feel free to put some thoughts in there if need be. I mean, I think we have plenty of time. If need be, I can unmute people to verbalize some questions or feedback as well. And those, I guess, on the XCOM, if folks on the XCOM have more comments to add, feel free at this time too.
And at Barack, I mentioned you and QZAP grant quite a bit, and not wanting to put you on the spot, but if there's any initial thoughts on what we've outlined here, and from your perspective, the opportunities within QZAP to address some of these things.
Sure, thanks, Dennis. I think you kind of nailed it. I think moving forward, in my interaction with the XCOM and sitting on the executive committee, I think we'll be looking at sort of the crossover points and overlap between what we would consider Fish and Wildlife Service priorities as it relates to the QZAP RFP or Notice of Funding Opportunity, and where we have overlap with the QZAP 2.0 and the subsequent WRP the larger groups prioritization of the QZAP 2.0. I imagine there's going to be quite a bit of overlap, and I don't see there being a lot of conflict between Fish and Wildlife Service highest priorities and WRP highest priorities as it relates to 2.0. So I think we're good.
Cool, thank you, Barack. And yeah, I think this document's going to really help streamline that process, hopefully for you, making it easier to go through various proposals that you get. But I think the work will be on our part, not wanting to compromise or get into conflict with the compliance procedures of grant funding. And so,
sure, yeah, of course. And we overcome a lot of that with the merit review teams and having reclamation on the review team and AIS coordinators within the service across the entire Western U.S. So,
cool.
Thanks.
Thank you, Barack. Leah?
I don't see any more questions or comments. Come on, now's your chance, everybody.
I have a question. This is Adam.
Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Go ahead.
Dennis, since only 17 people have responded, so the sample size is pretty low, when you say that there was kind of like a top level, ranking for each of the categories, was that the dominant consensus, or was there still kind of a lot of variability? In other words, does this really reflect the larger group, or is there so much variability that it's worth looking at again?
We struggled with that. We did have multiple rounds of requests for input, but at some point we do have to move forward. And I think the executive committee and any of the executive committee, please weigh in. I think we came to a point where we had to move forward and make some decisions. And I don't recall the numbers for each one, what the difference was. I'd have to go back and look at the data, but where the highest versus the medium ranked out. I believe all of the ones that were at least a medium received some level of voting, obviously, whereas others received no votes. Again, it's a small sample size, as you pointed out, but we need to move forward. And I think just from conversations and history and the previous work that we've done, I think what fleshed out as high and medium priorities seem to be consistent with a lot of the work that we're doing and the conversations we're having. But certainly if there's opportunities for additional input, that's something we can consider if there's something that is glaringly missing.
Oh, thank you. No, I mean, I contributed. I was just curious if there was looked like consensus or there was still a lot of variability.
Adam, I think the XCOM also, I think we in general had a little bit of disappointment across the board with responses to that, since we put so much effort into it, and the potential impact that this can have to agencies and many of the committee members and their respective agencies. We were expecting a little bit more response, so we could have a bigger sample size, as you mentioned, so we could have a little bit more power and understanding where priorities lied across the West. But that said, again, as Dennis mentioned, we have to move forward sometime at some point. Not to say that we're really guiding specifically on what's going to get funded, but in understanding what the priorities are across the West. So.
Yeah, thank you, Brock. That's a good point. This is a living document, as the previous one was, and so we'll continue to take feedback and input from our members and reprioritize if we need to. But this at least gives us a starting point.
Dennis, I have some comments, and I'm going to try to unmute Nate Owens here, but I'm going to just quick go through the comments. So Nick Zerflu is mentioning that there was, I guess, giving a little support to you guys, that there was lots of reminders to do the survey, and he felt that those that wanted to respond probably responded. And then he also suggested a survey in the off season, although I think February, I would consider February off season.
Well,
yes, send those surveys at the right time.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, that is a good point. Like you said, I think we did start in February, but it seems like that there isn't an off season anymore, unfortunately.
No, it doesn't.
So it's just the nature.
Okay.
But,
right.
But it's a good point.
Nate, I have unmuted you if you want to unmute yourself and pose your question.
And so cool. Nick does agree. He's questioning whether there's an off season or not as well. So
yeah.
Cool.
Go ahead, Nate.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Dennis. This was obviously a huge undertaking and super important to kind of provide a roadmap for where we're going. So we just saw something like 15 or so medium to high priorities identified. Obviously, step one is identifying the right priorities, which we've done. That's obviously a significant number of items that we need to make progress on over the next, few years or so. So I guess my question is related to, okay, now that we have the priorities identified, how are we going to make sure that these items in particular receive the appropriate attention and that there's a plan developed, including strategies on how to tackle them? Have we put any thought into what the next step is going to look like? Are we going to be assigning some of these things to like specific committees or working groups, or talking about forming additional working groups to tackle some of these?
Yeah, as I mentioned, in some of these action items, I think there are opportunities to utilize our existing committees or form new ones that can address some of these. But I think a logical next step is to have more detailed conversations at the XCOM as to how we think that might best, what should be those first next steps, developing committees, making sure we can get participation in those, working with the existing committees, understanding their workloads and priorities that they already have and see how these fit in. So there's still some work to be done on fleshing out strategies to accomplish these. But all those things you mentioned are part of the process.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And certainly feel free to volunteer, Nate.
All right, noted.
Well, I think that's all we have, Leah. Let's we move to our committee work group and accomplishments report out. And if we can make Christiani from California State Lands and our Coastal Committee Chair the presenter, we can turn it over to Chris and hear a report out on Coastal Committee accomplishments.
Sweet. Oh, here we go. Cool. Okay, well, yeah, thanks, Dennis. We'll just give a quick update on the things that we've been working on within the Coastal Committee the last year. One big product that we finalized this year, and if take a step back and look at a few years back, we had produced a white paper on biofouling on the West Coast or the Pacific Coast, and gave ourselves a few action items to try to tackle to fill in some information gaps, particularly focusing on vessel types that were unregulated and giving guidance on how to manage biofouling to prevent the spread of NIS across the region. And a few years ago, we finalized our first outreach document. Actually, that's kind of showing up weird. It's showing here on the screen. It's targeted towards recreational boats. Essentially, it's guidance for how a boat owner can manage biofouling with some good tips here. And we finalized that, we printed it out, and we had plans to distribute it. And then the pandemic kind of put a damper on that. But we continued to work over this past year on an additional vessel types. We created a different subcommittee to work on commercial fishing vessel guidance. And we've been working on that this last year, and we finalized that within the last few months. And it's a similar rack card, same size. It's a 4x9 card like this, a different orientation, but it's geared towards commercial fishing vessels this time, giving some specific guidance for those types of vessels and their operations. Just scroll through this real quick. And this one, we decided to make it more of a checklist for them the boat owners to be able to mark off when they're able to do some of these actions, and hopefully just something for them to keep in their kit, so that every year when they're going to start working and operating, that they could make sure that they're following what they should be doing to maintain the integrity of their vessel and reduce the likelihood of them being a vector. So both of these are on the Coastal Committee website. At the bottom, if anyone's interested, you can just download them, PDFs. As I said, we previously printed the recreational boat document. We did print out 15,000 of the commercial fishing vessel documents between Hawaii and Stephen Phillips. We then distributed them across the region. So each state, there's one central location within each state where we're housing 2,500 of the commercial fishing vessel documents. So if anyone's interested in getting some of them, just let us know, let me know, and I can point you to the person who holds them within your state, including British Columbia. And you can just send an email to coastal@westernregionalpanel.org. And yeah, our plans are going to be different within each state on how to distribute those to the fishing industry. Here in California, we were fortunate to be able to give them all to the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they are going to be mailing them out with a lot of the annual renewal applications for permitting commercial fishing vessels. So we're going to get these into the hands of the boat owners themselves, and that's fantastic. So that's the thing that came out of this year within the committee. We have another subcommittee that's working on a different type of guidance for managing biofouling for mobile marine infrastructure. So things like work vessels, barges, dredges, mobile drilling units, things like that. Our idea there is to produce guidance that would be used by permitting agencies when they have to approve projects, that they can require the permittee or the applicant to follow the guidance in the document that we end up producing. So we're more than halfway done with that. We've developed a skeleton. We've gotten some external feedback on it, and now that this one's done, we're going to focus more on that to try to get that done in this coming year. That's about it for the products and things we've done. Just one additional thing that was very interesting to me. I missed it all because I was out on parental leave, but there was a really nice discussion via email between our committee members on the idea of avoiding the use of origin when describing species names, common names, sorry. Just because it can lead to stigmatizing names of things like the Asian murder hornet and the type of harm that it could lead to by using stigmatizing names. And so we had a really nice discussion. A lot of the members of the committee weighed in, and it led to a recommendation for the task force. And I believe the outreach subcommittee is going to be taking it up and having discussions at that level. So curious to see how that plays out. And yeah, just thank everybody in the committee for their hard work this past year, and we'll continue doing that this year.
Great, thank you, Chris. And if there's any questions for Chris or members of the Coastal Committee, please put them in the question box. I don't see any at the moment, but we'll leave that open and come back to them at the end of the committee report outs. But I'm always impressed by the Coastal Committee. That's such a broad array of different issues, you know, not only recreation, but commercial hauling, giant shipping vessels and fishing boats. And thank you for all the work. And then you mentioned the naming issue, for lack of a better word. It's a very complicated and sensitive issue. And it's going to be difficult. And so I'm grateful for both the Coastal Committee and the Education Committee that is willing to tackle that. And as you mentioned, it was a recommendation to the task force. And it was a work product, I believe, of the task force to develop a community of practice. Doug Jensen from Minnesota Sea Grant is something he started and something he's also passionate about. And that is one of the things he wants that community of practice to address, one of the initial things. So I think we've got some good news on that front to really delve into a really complicated and difficult issue. So thank you, Chris.
Yeah. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, the rest of the committee.
And now I am going to turn it over to Robert Walters from the state of Colorado to update us on the Decon think tank. A lot of great work that happens there. Something I'm in tune with. I know our Tahoe membership has a lot of participation there, and so really always encouraged by the great work that comes out of that committee. So I'll turn it over to you, Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. Let me see if I can get this going for you here real quick. And is that showing up for you, Dennis, or no?
Yep, we see your slide.
Okay, outstanding. Well, again, this is just an update from our Decontamination Think Tank Committee. Again, for those that I haven't met, my name is Robert Walters. I'm the Invasive Species Program Manager here for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. It's truly my pleasure to chair this committee. So in regards to our primary accomplishments for the last year, we did have the opportunity to provide some input on some very consequential documents, including the Advanced Decontamination Manual that's recently been produced by the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. the WID Trainers Manual, which has been updated and is now posted on the Western Regional Panel as well as the Western AIS website. We'll also hopefully be getting to provide a little input on the Student Manual, which is currently being updated and will be completed by the end of the year, along with a new online refresher course. If you want to provide input on that Student Manual, please do contact Elizabeth Brown. And then the majority of the work that we have done over the last year has really been focused on reviewing and revising the existing decontamination as well as inspection procedures that are being taught all across the West. So why in the world are we spending so much time focusing on revising these inspection and decontamination procedures? Well, they haven't been updated in about 5 years, which may not seem like a significant amount of time. However, in the world of watercraft, the technology is changing at a rapid rate. These boats are becoming more and more complex each and every year. So we want to make sure that our inspection and decontamination procedures are up to date with the current technology that we are encountering. Standardizing these procedures does help to standardize and improve the customer experience as they are interacting with our inspectors and decontaminators. We hope this increases the level of trust across jurisdictions. If I know my friends in Utah are doing inspections and decontaminations the exact same way that we are, there's more hope for things such as reciprocity. And of course, we want to ensure the highest level of protection for our aquatic resources. So in regards to the decontamination procedures, we did spend quite a bit of time this last year, particularly focused on 3 procedures. We have reviewed and revised the standing water decontamination of interior compartments, not including ballast systems. That one we're still working on. We've reviewed and revised the standing water decontamination for outboards as well as inboard-outboard engines and the standing water decontamination of inboard engines. These revised procedures were approved by the Executive Committee back in January, which was perfect timing for us to be able to get those documents up and available on the Western Regional Panel site, as well as for those of us that are out there actively training inspectors to incorporate those into our WID training programs all across the West, which is awesome. So I've talked a little bit about this in previous meetings, but we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years making sure that our inspection procedures are really top-notch and that we're incorporating everything we know. We did revise 3 procedures, which were actually approved by the Executive Committee back in June of 2020, so that's not new news. What is new news is, June is not the best time to start incorporating new procedures into an existing inspection and decontamination program. So over the winter of 2020 into 2021, we were able to incorporate these revised procedures into many of our training programs, and they are now being implemented more consistently out there on the ground. So another pretty cool thing that we're working on in regards to these inspection procedures is that the Western Regional Panel did recommend to the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force that they consider adopting these procedures that we have come up with as the national standard for watercraft inspection. There is not currently a national standard for how we inspect boats, but our committee really feels like an inspection should be an inspection regardless of where you are. So I had the opportunity to work with the Prevention Subcommittee back this spring. They were very, very helpful and provided a lot of great comments as to how we could modify these procedures to make them a little bit less West-centric and more universally applicable. Our committee did review and adopt the majority of those comments into this procedure. And then back in June, I had the opportunity to present those procedures to the entirety of the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force for consideration as a national standard. At that time, the task force did elect to defer the adoption of this standard. At the time, I must admit I was a little bit disappointed, but in hindsight, I actually think this is awesome. The reason they were deferred wasn't necessarily about the procedures themselves, but more about giving the other panels the opportunity to review and provide comments on these procedures. At this point, I think that is awesome. The more input we can get, the more broadly these things may be accepted in the long term. So we are continuing down that path. I did just receive some of those comments here this past week, particularly from the Great Lakes panel, and our committee will be getting back together next week to start reviewing these comments. And then I'll once again have the pleasure of working with that prevention subcommittee coming up in the first week of October. So what are we looking forward to for the upcoming year? I'm really hoping that we can continue working through that process of having these inspection procedures adopted as a national standard. I'm hopeful that once we kind of figure out this path and the best way to get these things approved and adopted, that we can then follow that same path for having our decontamination procedures also looked at as a national standard. We're not quite done reviewing and revising all of these different decontamination procedures, so that's going to be some primary focus that we're working on this winter. We are almost done with the procedure for ballast systems, which is very, very complicated. We're then going to move on to focusing on plant decontamination, bait treatments, and then the big hurrah, the full decontamination procedure. Once we've gotten through those 4 existing procedures, we'll have been through every procedure that's out there in regards to decontamination. So again, that's really what we've done over the last year or so. I certainly want to thank every member of our committee for the significant input that they've had in coming up with all of these procedures and the other work that we're doing. And all of these documents that we're working on can be found on the Western Regional Panel's website under that key documents page. I think that does it for me, Dennis.
All right, thank you, Robert. Great work as always. It's really the frontline defense that we have battling the spread of whatever it is. Obviously, quagga zebra mussels are high on everybody's list, but the procedures and protocols that have been developed really make us primed for anything and whatever the next invader is. There will be something else, and so all this hard work puts us in a really good position to address that whenever it comes up. There was one other thing I wanted to ask or mention, but can't remember. Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about the task force, and I think I was feeling a little discouraged at the time as well that it was tabled, if you will. But like you said, I think it's encouraging that we're getting that interest. I think if we had presented this to maybe even just a little over a year ago, there may not have been that much interest, and I think it goes to show the value that the Western and the leadership that Western Regional Panel has provided on this issue, that other panels and other partners are recognizing the value in all this, and so now they're wanting to participate. So I think that's a good sign, like you said, so thank you. I am now going to turn it over to Monica Garrity from Texas. She's going to update us on the Education and Outreach and Education Committee, excuse me. A lot of great work going on there as well. As I mentioned, Allison had been a big participant in this, thanking her for her leadership on the Executive Committee, but Monica also doing fantastic work with the Education Outreach Committee, was also very, gave a lot of thoughtful input and insight on the naming issue. So thank you, Monica, for all your hard work, and please take it away.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Are you able to see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. So yes, my name is Monica McGarity. I'm the Senior Scientist for Aquatic Invasive Species with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and I chair the WRP Education and Outreach Committee, and very fortunate to work with this group of great folks. We have a committee that represents not only agency, but also academia and industry that work together on all of these efforts. This past year, one of the key things that we've done is to update our committee profile and really kind of redefine some of our priorities and focus in especially on QZAP. So, with our key priorities really being to identify what are the outreach needs and education needs for the WRP, serve as a resource and provide feedback for WRP members on education and outreach efforts, whether it's through providing references on outreach materials that are used through other states or review of materials, and providing recommendations and best practices. We're also working to try to really strategically address the QZAP education and outreach strategies in a very systematic way. and also to conduct, support, and coordinate social science research to enhance ANS outreach efforts, which has been a big focus of our work over the past year. And then to develop and promote recommendations and key strategies for outreach coming out of some of our committee work. The initiative that we focused on the most over the past year has been conducting an assessment of the effectiveness of outreach campaign messaging and delivery methods for eliciting behavior change, specifically among boaters, and looking at different specific boating and boater demographics. And this addresses one of the specific QZAP action items under research. But as Dennis pointed out, this also addresses one of the education and outreach objectives of ensuring consistent messaging, as well as kind of setting the stage for beginning to address several other QZAP initiatives. This study focuses on assessing Western state campaigns, both the messaging that we're putting out there and the delivery methods that we're using for outreach. And to conduct this study, we obtained a QZAP grant in partnership with ISAN, and of course a huge thank you to Leah Elwell for all of her work and all of her support for us on this. And we've contracted with the Texas A&M University researcher, Dr. Jared Kyle, who's a human dimensions researcher with a lot of experience and background in conducting natural resource and human dimensions of natural resource studies, including some related to aquatic invasive species. So the current status of the project is that coordination is underway with the different states for implementation of focus groups, followed by a survey and a message testing experiment. A big thank you also to all of the state ANS coordinators who collaborated with Dr. Kyle to help make this possible. And focus group surveys for this have already begun, and we expect that the survey itself will begin in the next couple of months. We're also coordinating with the ANS task force's selected researcher working on a similar project. They're working on an assessment of national campaigns across a variety of different user groups, not only boaters, and really focusing on those national campaigns. And so not only do we have 4 members of our committee who are sitting on the ANS Task Force Communication, Education, and Outreach Subcommittee, but we also have our researchers directly in touch so that they can coordinate on these 2 projects to minimize overlap and redundancy and really make sure that these studies are complementary. So this project is slated to be completed in 2022 with a final report in July. And I look forward to being able to provide some reports on this to the panel next year. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Monica. Don't see any questions. And Adam, I did just notice you had a question for Robert, so we'll get to that at the end. But again, Monica, great work, and really education being one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal, and you guys are really knocking it out of the park, so thank you. All right, now we're going to turn it over to Adam Sepulveda from USGS to provide an update from the eDNA working group. Let's see. Presenter, Adam.
Nothing to present. I'll just yes.
Okay, take it away.
Cool. All right. Thank you. What I wanted to share is that we've had primarily monthly, virtual phone call meetings throughout the non-field season, so primarily October through about April or May. Most of our meetings have served as an information exchange between, technical experts and managers, decision makers, stakeholders. The primary product that we, produced or delivered was more of a consensus agreement to adapt some recent standards that Canada DFO put out for guidance on the use of targeted eDNA for management of aquatic invasive species. It was a peer-reviewed, vetted document that this Canadian group put out that was really directed towards managers, identify best practices and a lot of the kind of need to know before you get into eDNA. information. So we talked about this document for 1 or 2 meetings and then put it forth to XCOM to, I guess, approve and recommend that those interested in using targeted eDNA look through for guidance. That was our primary product. And then for this upcoming year, we're going to have, I guess, kind of a technical expert provide an approximate 15-minute talk at our monthly meetings from October through May, followed with 15 minutes of discussion and then a 30-minute meeting after that. We have all those meetings, or those, we've already secured a technical expert to provide a talk at all those meetings for this upcoming year. And then the other things to highlight is just general encouragement for any states here that do have, I guess, either state associated, state collaborated eDNA programs. For example, state of Washington and Oregon with Portland State University. If you do have eDNA programs, I just really want to encourage you to identify someone that could participate in this working group, since right now it's kind of dominated by myself and Yael Pasamenik, who is the other co-chair and with the Bureau of Reclamation that serve as it's kind of more the federal eDNA technical experts. We don't really have much voice or participation from anyone, either that's a state agency or closely working with a state agency for environmental DNA. So just that general encouragement, please, to prod your partners and collaborators to participate. And aside from that, I guess encouragement to look for future co-chairs, specifically from someone that is not a eDNA technical expert, but maybe more of someone who is a manager or end user, just to truly make sure that we are just getting closer to our goals and objectives. That's it, and thank you.
Thank you, Adam, and really thank you both you and Yael for your leadership on this. You've taken an issue that there was some tension, I think, is a fair assessment on eDNA with a lot of different parts of our membership, and really your ability to take that, for me, it's a very complicated process, but, a lot of science involved, of course, but being able to kind of navigate that and put it into a context where we now understand its usability and its importance in our efforts for monitoring. So thank you, I really appreciate it. And also second your encouragement for participation to keep the ball rolling on this. Wait. Do you have a question from Catherine D. Rivera? PSU's main eDNA person is finishing, but we will try to identify someone else. So not a question, but a comment.
Thank you.
All right. And if there are questions that pop up on any of the committee reports, please feel free to add them and we'll get to them at the end. So now we will turn it over to Kate Wilson from Montana to give us an update on the fire equipment decontamination work group. You are now a presenter, Kate. Take it away.
All right, I too am just gonna give a verbal update. I guess to start, fire is so complex, and I took over this work group a couple years ago when Beth Baer moved on, and just want to fully acknowledge that intended to get more accomplished by now, but have just kind of hit some stumbling blocks. So first I'll kind of give you the history on how this came about and then kind of where we're at now. So I think most people are probably aware in 2017, the Forest Service national team took developed a really comprehensive, thorough, and science-based guidelines specifically for wildland fire and preventing aquatic invasive spread. So Cynthia Tate, just want to give her big kudos for that. She led that effort. And then about a year later in 2018, as this guide started getting into the hands of fire managers here in the Northern Rockies, so I'm in Montana, the Northern Rockies are North Idaho, Montana, and North Dakota, and a tiny portion of South Dakota. here in particular, when managers receive that very comprehensive document, they're not AIS practitioners or experts, right? They're fire managers, maybe they're a resource advisor, but they don't necessarily have any expertise in this issue. And so I think what was happening was, you know, there's a lot of decisions to make based on that guide. It doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you all of the science that suggests, you know, these products for these species at this concentration. So it was leaving these decisions to personnel, like I said, with very little experience in aquatics. And so these decisions are things like, what species are we most concerned about? That's very site specific. What products will be selected and then disposed of, and how. And then, of course, the associated equipment that would be, you know, related to that treatment. So also want to note here that hot water, you know, what we would always go to in the boat world, not really available on most fires. So fire agencies don't typically have mobile hot sea units like, you know, we all do now. And they also are in very remote and rural settings a lot of the time. So what happened in the next step was here in the Northern Rockies, the leadership agencies were looking for a more prescriptive protocol. So there was a group of, I don't know, probably 10 of us, Forest Service, state DNRC, that's who I work for, that got together and kind of went through the guide and figured out what would work to, as a 2-pager that's like more prescriptive, but based on the science of the national guide. So here in the Northern Rockies, that became a mandatory protocol. We were all very excited about that. And essentially, you know, based on the guide, but is more prescriptive. So it's like a recipe. You're going to need these things at this concentration with, you know, some variability based on situation. So the focus too is really on the key equipment that might touch multiple bodies of water, such as foot valves, draft hoses, and helicopter buckets. So there's a lot of best management practices in the National Guide. And so as long as those are being followed, then you can be this prescriptive with, you know, very specific equipment. So what happened from there is, you know, there's a lot of different regions and agencies and provinces doing their own kind of approach to fire equipment. And so this working group was established to compare and contrast those different practices, and then essentially develop a template that could be easily adopted in other regions, states, or provinces. So using the Northern Rockies Guide as a foundation, that's how we kind of started. And have made a fair amount of progress, a lot of great discussion, but this is where I say we've also been delayed. And I think a lot of that is turnover in the group, just kind of having to start over because this is a very complicated topic. You have to kind of know the National Guide, know the Northern Rockies Guide, and know, you know, what's going on in different areas. So also, you know, I've had trouble making enough time for it. So not making excuses, just being clear that this is a tough one to navigate. It isn't just going to affect, you know, aquatic invasive species managers and practitioners. It's the fire world. And anyone who's worked in this world, there's so many agencies and it's kind of chaotic, right? And so it's like, oh, and you need to do this one other thing. So I guess my thinking has kind of changed about the approach. At first being really excited about this one prescriptive, here's how you do it. And then having a lot of trouble, frankly, just like even getting the word out about a mandatory protocol that already exists here in the Northern Rockies, let alone spreading out to other areas potentially. So I'm also on a fire team, and I think this has kind of changed the evolution of my thought as well. Like, frankly, it would be great if on a fire, the team that's assigned to it is using any part of the National Guide, right? And the reason that we move to this more prescriptive is it's more simple, it's clear. They don't have to decide for themselves, you know, is it mussels that we're mostly worried about? Is there another species in this particular area that we should be, you know, more concerned about? So anyway, my own team is, so there's 3 different levels of incidents essentially. Number 1, type 1 would be those big, huge fires or national disasters. 2, still pretty big, but more moderate. And then 3 would be mostly like teams from the state itself. They're smaller. My own team received the mandatory protocol and had not been using it. So I think I've been asking a lot of questions about why and trying to figure out, you know, how do we motivate the fire world to want to do this or do it in a way that isn't going to disrupt or cause inconveniences, right? So there's just a lot of nuances. And so moving into where we're at now, I have gotten really good feedback from a variety of folks. Most of them, though, are AIS practitioners. They're not fire practitioners. And so I think that is the struggle that we continue to have. So at this point, I'm just incorporating the feedback into the template, but also really thinking about adding a caveat that's, you know, here's an idea for a very prescriptive, you know, approach if that's what you want, but also this guide, the national guide, really has a suite of options for you. And it may be the best approach to really lean on that and say, you know, whatever you're most concerned about in your area just needs to be based on this national guide. So that's where we're at. I also would like to develop like resources and training tips because, again, this is not AIS practitioners, this is fire practitioners, and we kind of have to tell them why it's important, right? I think also learning more about invasives in general and fire, the weed wash situation, they use external vendors most of the time, and it's like become a bit of an issue. And so we're really trying not to replicate that program, but to develop something that can be done internally by fire staff and managers. So the 2 products would be a template for other regions and for the Northern Rockies to update as well, with that caveat that if this doesn't work for you, it needs to be, you know, from this list of options essentially. And then here's all the resources that exist. There's some great videos now, and just kind of providing tips about how you might go about adopting a mandatory protocol for fire equipment. So moving forward, once the working group has had time to review the kind of updated template, I would provide it to the XCOM, and it's a work in progress. So I think as things evolve or new technologies emerge, that's always something that we'd want to consider as well. But I'm kind of hoping that those products are deliverables, and maybe this work group could be picked up again if you know, new science emerged or there were other options available. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions and really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Kate. And really, I think it's all the work that has been done. It's difficult with wildfire being more pervasive every year with these 100,000 acre fires that were very, very rare are now the norm. And so to be able to have any engagement with fire managers is really impressive. So thank you. We don't have any questions, but just some comments. An offer from Nick from Idaho, ready to participate with the fire group team. And then from Adam Sepulveda, Kate, as your group is working on an easy to adapt template, I really encourage that your working group does a book club and reads, well, it's a link, but it's a book that identifies how much is enough versus too much when thinking about prescriptive checklists that need to be adaptable. And so we'll get that link posted so you can follow that. And then just one question, backtracking from Adam, also for Robert on Think Tank. Any discussion about evaluation criteria when considering replacing an older protocol standard with something new? It's a good question.
Yeah, I'd say the short answer to that is no, we haven't really looked at an evaluation criteria per se. In terms of these procedures, I mean, we have 3 inspection procedures and I think 8 decontamination procedures in total. So more the approach that we have taken is to look back and review each and every one of those. What we've kind of found in that process is some of them almost needed no change whatsoever, and we could get through those exceptionally fast in an hour or so. The ones that really need a lot of revision, you know, such as the ballast tank one, we've put numerous hours into that and still haven't completed that. So at this point, I think we're just kind of going through each and every one of them, and maybe a timeline for review might be a better approach to kind of thinking about when we want to revise those.
Thank you. All right. That concludes our committee and work group accomplishments report. So thank you all, really outstanding, impressive. Keep up the great work. We're really lucky to have all of you as leaders of those committees. So now I'm going to turn it over to John Wolschlager from Park Service. He's going to give us an update on bylaws and standard operating procedures. He is the chair of our membership and communication committee. So John, I will make you a presenter, and the floor is yours. We can see your screen, John, but we cannot hear you.
Sorry, I could not unmute myself.
There you go. We hear you and see your screen.
What do you see?
We see a Word document.
That's not what you're supposed to see. Let's try that again. Do I have any control over what I can, let's see.
You should.
Chief presenter. Yeah. Oh no. Huh. Let me see if I can drag this. Sorry about that. I am not. Now, let's see.
We saw your PowerPoint for a second. Oh, here it comes.
Here it comes, but when I, hang on. I've got two screens and I'm a little bit, it's showing up on both screens, but hang on just a second here.
Yeah, you're not in presenter mode, what we're seeing.
No, I know. For some reason, when I go into present, how about now?
Well, now we're seeing like your notes page as well.
Which is weird. Okay. Yeah, I can.
I think let's just go with this. We can see.
Go with this.
We can see the slides, but you are. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, the presenter mode is showing up on my other monitor, and I do not know how to change it actually. So anyway, this will probably do as long as that's not too small for people. We can just go through this. First of all, we've arrived at the esoteric part of our program now, so but it might be important. We'll see. I just want to thank my fellow committee members, Elizabeth Brown, Tammy Davis, Kelly Stockton, and Jeff Adams for their participation and for all their thoughtful input. So the purpose of our committee is really, for the most part, to review the bylaws and the membership categories every 4 years. This is the 4th year. This is when we typically would be making changes. We also do this draft letter to non-participating individuals. To date, during my tenure, we haven't done that. I don't know if there'll be a need to do that this year. I guess we'll follow up after the meeting here. So we've had a lot of discussions both this year and last year, a lot with regard to the bylaws, and a lot of our focus has been on these items: providing for succession, ensuring leadership, making sure that the structure keeps us as an effective body going forward, diverse panel membership, and providing opportunities for participation by all different groups. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about the structure of the executive committee. This is sort of our current model for how things work. We elect people to the XCOM, and then the XCOM elects a chair and a vice chair. We spent a fair amount of time talking about alternative models for that. Some of the other panels do something more like this, where the XCOM elects a vice chair who succeeds a chair, and then we have a post-chair position. In the end, we decided not to do anything like that in the bylaws, and decided a lot of this stuff would be better handled through standard operating procedures. There's a set of those that exist right now as a draft document. So these were basically created by the executive committee to provide guidance for consistent operations, to provide a record for processes for actions that are taken by the panel, and they're subject to change by the executive committee, and that's done by a vote. So in the current version of those standard operating procedures, these are some of the items that are addressed: the roles and responsibilities of the officers and the coordinator, logistics and rules, how we interact with ANSTF, how the annual meeting's conducted, the mid-year conference call, how documents are finalized, et cetera, letters and endorsements, website, listserv, et cetera. All these are items in there in the draft document, and I think what the membership and communications committee ultimately decided we ought to do was to basically formalize the existence of the standard operating procedures in the bylaws. And so somewhat at the very last minute here, prior to this meeting, and I don't believe it got out as part of the document for vote, we drafted some language for that that essentially looks like this, which is: the executive committee may adopt the standard operating procedures to provide for guidance for consistent, effective operations for things that are not described in the bylaws. They can be changed as necessary by a vote of the committee, and that there'll be any changes that are made over the course of a year will be communicated back to the panel membership at the annual meeting every year. This is what the draft language looks like now. It has not been fully vetted by the executive committee, so it may change, but I think the idea at this point is to finalize some sort of language and get it back out to the membership for a vote. So I think you can expect to be seeing something like that. And that is pretty much what we did this year. So that concludes for me.
All right. Thank you, John. Don't see any questions, but thank you for that information and in the work. It's from my perspective, this is something that's been on my mind as far as leadership and how that works. I've been in the chair position for a little over a year, and it was daunting to take on that role. And so when there's opportunities to encourage additional participation and really an ability to identify expectations, but putting in having different ideas on pathways of leadership and things like that to try to take some of that fear away, so others will want to participate, I think is important. So thank you, John, and the rest of the committee for addressing this.
Yeah, and just to add one more thing to this is I think it may not always be obvious from the outside, from the membership, the amount of work that goes into a lot of the things that are done, and there's a lot expected of the chair and the vice chair in particular. Obviously, the coordinator does a lot of work, and we were blessed for many years to have a chair who had a lot of time to put into this, but the chair has all of our chairs have had other full-time jobs, and so the idea behind these standard operating procedures is really to give us the flexibility to kind of move things around or reorganize things or reconfigure as needed on the fly, because we have elections every year. We could have a different chair. They may have more or less time to put into it. They may want to emphasize different things, and so that's really the idea behind the standard operating procedures.
Yep, thank you. Agreed. Having them just more flexible and dynamic and more of a living document. So agreed. Thank you. Don't see any questions. So we will now move to an update from Leah from ISAN and our WRP coordinator on the annual budget and membership and executive committee election results. So Leah.
Hey.
You can probably make yourself a presenter. I'm not even seeing
Yes.
it. Oh,
yep, I've got it. I'm trying to show my
you.
screen here.
Go ahead.
All right. Whoops. Let's see. I'm having really low. I'm gonna take off my webcam So I'm trying to show my screen and it's really being slow for me. Huh.
Yeah, we're seeing it now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Like I just have oddly low bandwidth today, so I'm sorry for the delay.
I feel that way all the time.
Right. All right, let me just try this one more time. Well, this is really infuriating. I'm sort of in John's boat right now. I can't get it to go into presentation mode at all. So we'll just go with this. So the brief report I will be giving is, so many of you know, historically, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service provides support to all of the panels. So that's the nice little handy map I'm showing there. And all of the panels receive $50,000 annually, or at least that's what it has been for the last few years. There have been points in the not so distant past where that amount of 50,000 did decrease some, and there's been times when there's been a little bit more money too, but 50,000 is generally where it lands and what comes into each panel. For roughly the last decade, the WRP has contracted with Invasive Species Action Network to be the coordinator, but also in that coordination capacity, we are providing fiscal management. So maintaining the savings account, which I'll get to, and as Monica mentioned, we helped assist securing grant funding for the committee to do that contracted work that Monica reported on. So those funds, that 50,000 that comes in, they are expended fully annually. As I just mentioned, the savings account, so the WRP created this in 2015, and this was created with uncommitted funds that came in for the annual meeting. So previous sponsors to meetings, if the income that was brought in was a little bit more than what the expenses were, then that was the funds that helped create it. Currently, the balance is $8,335. In terms of actual and anticipated expenses that we're looking at for 2021, as you guys know, virtual meetings, they're not very expensive. So really there have not been too much in terms of expense. Obviously to have this platform that we're all joining that allows us to share our screens and do what we're doing here, that costs money, and that was $1,000, almost $1,200. So that was the fees associated with this meeting. And then also travel to attend task force. So typically that would be, the spring and fall meetings, but of course there's no travel and those have all been virtual. So that's essentially been zero. So how did we pay for that? GoToMeeting platform, the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, i.e. Stephen Phillips, was able to support that cost of that $1,200, which is very helpful. So thank you, Stephen. And then looking forward to 2022, as you all know, there's still plenty of uncertainty. But if we look at some of the last expenses that were incurred and income that was needed, really it boils down to, again, annual meeting and chair or coordinator travel. So if we're looking at more of a virtual situation for next year, we could be sitting at around, again, that $1,200 aspect. But if we go to an in-person meeting, those typically ran in anywhere between $15,000 to $20,000. Oh, that actually says $1,500, a little typo there. But we would also rely on sponsors to help support that meeting or hosts, etc. So time will tell on what that looks like, whether we're looking at a virtual or an in-person, and Tammy's going to chat with us more on the second in that. And then same with the chair and coordinator travel to task force meetings. At this point, as far as I know, those will all be virtual, but we'll just have to see and be flexible. So if travel is taking place, we're looking at more of a price tag or needs for expenses of around $20,000. support the WRP in their expenses. So if anybody has a quick question, anything budget related, I'll just pause for 2 seconds there before I do this. So you can still ask a budget question if you want to. But so the election results, the polls were opened several weeks ago, and I circulated to all of the current voting members, the packet of information with those that were interested both in running for the executive committee for the next 2-year terms, and then also any of the non-appointing voting members that are within the WRP. Those have to go up for election or re-election, if you will, every 4 years. So the election poll closed last night. And for your executive committee, for a 21-23 term, we have Blaine Parker with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, Stephen Phillips with PSMFC, Barack Shamai with the Fish and Wildlife Service, Chris Steffen with the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, and then Martha Volkoff with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And of course, these join your current standing XCOM members of Dennis Zabaglo, Tom Wolf, Glenn Dolphin, John Walshlager. And then thank you very much to Allison Zach for your service on the executive committee. And then lastly, for the membership election results, those that were seeking membership seats, and those were confirmed by the current voting members. So we have the Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers Association, Jackson Gross with the University of California, Christine Moffitt, Emeritus with University of Idaho, Kat D. Rivera with Portland State University, Glenn Dolphin with Oregon State Marine Board, and yours truly here, Invasive Species Action Network, Mike Stevenson, Idaho Power, California State's Land Commission, and then finally Blaine Parker with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. So congrats to all those renewed members or new members. And that is all I have then, Dennis. We can move on to our next item.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any questions, just a thanks from Allison. And again, thank you for your service, Allison, and welcome, Chris. Expecting great things from you, so welcome aboard to the executive committee. And now we will turn it over to Tammy Davis and giving us an update on hopefully our future endeavor to the great state of Alaska for our 2022 meeting. So do you have a presentation at all, Tammy?
I just have a lovely slide. Oops.
I think you're the presenter.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hi, everybody. Nice to know that you're out there, even if I can't see some of you. Just a quick thanks to the XCOM and the annual meeting committee for another great meeting. As you may remember, in 2019, we voted to have the 2020 meeting in Alaska, but the pandemic didn't allow that. And then when it seemed like we might be able to meet in person due to a host of variables, the membership decided that meeting in Salt Lake City and having just a member meeting was a good alternative. So now here we are. Looking at 2022, sorry. Hopeful that you all will join us in Anchorage, Alaska. And that invitation comes from me with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the Alaska region of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and our statewide invasive species partnership. It's a good thing we didn't have our meeting in Alaska this year because Alaska is now topping the charts with COVID numbers and our hospitals are full. So I'm hopeful that the pandemic sort of peters out and everybody makes the best decisions so that we can meet again in person, and that situations allow us to meet finally in Alaska. So if anybody has questions or comments, happy to take those. You've already seen the song and dance, the wonderful fishing and hiking and beauty of Alaska, so I won't put you through that again.
No, well, just a thanks from Tim Cunahan, but no other questions. So
Great.
looking forward with fingers crossed that we'll be there in a year's time. I'm looking forward to it. I know it's been on my bucket list, so fingers crossed.
Yeah,
thanks, Tammy.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Just a question from Josh. Josh Leonard, any tentative dates for next year's meeting? I don't think we have that yet, but I don't know, Tammy, if that's inaccurate, if you have dates in mind already.
Don't have dates. I know when we originally started planning for an Alaska meeting, we planned a little earlier in the season so that people might be able to experience Alaska more than they might in October or November.
That makes sense. Okay, no other questions. So now we will turn it over to Susan Pascoe. She's the Executive Secretary for the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force to give us an update. And Susan, you should already be presenter. Looks like you got your screen up, and so I'll turn it over to you, but you are still on mute.
There's that mute button. Great.
There you go. Thank you.
All right, now if I can get my presentation started here. Okay, how's that looking?
Looking good.
Okay, great. All right, well, happy Friday, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to present the task force update. I know it's getting late in the day, at least it is out here on a Friday, so I'll try to keep this short, but we have had a lot of activity with the task force this year, so I'm just going to give you a brief overview. Maybe. There we go. Oh, great. Okay, so usually I like to start out with just a brief introduction of what the task force is in case we do have any newcomers on the call. So the task force was established by Congress with the passage of the Non-Indigenous Aquatic Nuisance Prevention Act of 1990. Under this act, the task force was formed to develop and implement a program for waters of the United States to prevent introduction, dispersal of ANS, monitor, control, and study such species, and disseminate related information. Okay, so here is our visual structure of how the task force operates and who is involved. Again, we do have 13 federal members, and it is co-chaired by the Fish and Wildlife Service as well as NOAA. Pretty much any federal agency that does have either an interest or a role in invasive species, aquatic invasive species, is invited to become part of the task force. And we also do have 13 ex officio members as well, which can represent organizations from different regions, industry, research entities. Again, just giving more strength to the task force, but providing a lot of diversity around the table. As you're well aware, we do have 6 regional panels that are essential to the working of the task force. I'll talk about them a little bit more on my next slide. And we also do have currently 5 standing subcommittees that align with our goals and objectives in our strategic plan. All right, so here is a visual representation of our 6 regional panels. Again, just want to recognize that these are our working arms of the task force. We really could not progress the task force as productively without the regional panels. So again, thank you for all the work that you do. I was going to mention some of the funding associated with the panels, but since Leah already covered that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our state management plans. Again, a primary role for the state task force is to provide technical support to states for the development of state or interstate management plans. We currently have 44 approved plans by the task force. 41 of those are state plans, 3 are interstate. And approval of the task force does mean that they are eligible for funding through the grant program provided by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So that has grown steadily for the last few years. So this year we were appropriated approximately $4 million for the implementation of that grant program. Those funds are split evenly between every state plan that does apply for funds. This year, 42 of the 44 plans applied. So breaking it down, give or take, each one received about $96,000 for their implementation for this year. And my understanding, though, is that money has been given out to the regional offices of the Fish and Wildlife Service to start getting that money out the door to states, and that is something that is currently ongoing. Okay, moving on to our current meetings of the task force. Our last meeting was on June 22nd through June 30th. Just like everyone else, we are meeting virtually still. So this was 3 days, half days of virtual meetings. The agenda as well as the meeting minutes are on the task force website if you want to take a bit more of a detailed look. However, just a brief overview, we did receive a lot of updates for our task force members as well as interagency invasive species organizations. Our subcommittees all presented their progress reports on what they're doing. In addition, we also had some informational sessions on topics such as ballast water, early detection rapid response framework, and the evaluation of outreach campaigns. On the slide here, I have the action items that were generated as part of that meeting. First of all, the task force did approve 2 documents come from our control subcommittee. The first one is the assessment of the species control management plans of the Aquatic Species Task Force. And the second one that was approved was guidance for aquatic nuisance species control and management plans, a development for processing required plan content. So some technical documents that have to relate to the development of specific species control plans. And both of those will soon be available up on our website if you would like to read them in detail. Some action items for our prevention subcommittee, which I believe were already covered. But again, I'm very happy that they have reached out to start pursuing looking at how we can possibly work together to conduct that traffic assessment and inform roadside inspection stations. Already mentioned, the prevention subcommittee is looking at the comments that were received on the watercraft best management practices. That will be something that will circle around to our next meeting for the subcommittee to mention how they address those comments and hopefully again put them up for possible adoption for the task force. In addition to that, another action item for the prevention subcommittee was to look at establishing a ballast water ad hoc committee. A lot of activity and discussion around ballast water management with the new VITA Act. So they are looking at putting together a ad hoc committee to try and address those concerns, as well as do things such as collect and share information regarding the different aspects of that. Our control subcommittee, we also did have several recommendations from the panels and others to begin to update some of the species management plans that are becoming a little bit dated. So the control subcommittee is looking at identifying a lead as well as getting a working group going and identifying the individuals who are best suited to work on those updates. In addition to that, they are also drafting a framework for basically if we ever decide that we want to do another brand new species control plan, developing the framework for who would be responsible for drafting that plan, implementing that plan, and what sort of information should be compiled as we build that plan. And again, the last one has to do with action items regarding ballast water. Again, a lot of great discussion at our June meeting on this topic. Where the action items landed is that the U.S. Coast Guard, that should be Coast Guard, not GS, but the Coast Guard will be working with the Northeast panel, and they had a recommendation where they would like some more information about different states' programs, so they're going to work with them on collecting that information. And lastly, the EPA is going to look in the potential funding line for the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain Invasive Species Program, which was a component of the VITA Act. Okay, moving on quickly, trying to stay within my time limit here. You may be familiar with our task force strategic plan. Again, within the strategic plan, we do have 6 comprehensive goals. Each one of those has dropped down objectives as well as strategies. We do have 5 standing committees who are set up to work on progressing those goals And on the next few slides, I'm just going to go very briefly through some of their main focus at this time. Okay, so starting with the control goal, the coordination goal. This is the one that does not have a subcommittee associated with it, simply because a lot of the action items listed here within the work plan are things that just happen at a very routine basis or are handled by myself internally as the executive secretary or some of my staff. Many of these are just routine operations, such as holding our meetings and developing reports. But a couple I just want to highlight that are ongoing right now is, first of all, the refresh of the task force website. If you visited the task force website, you know that it is very much stuck in the 90s at this time. So we're looking forward to getting a refresh. We're working with a graphic designer to add some new logos and some great headers to that. So that is currently being built. So I'm very happy to mention that our task force should be going live this November. Some other things we're working on is an informational packet for new task force members so that they have a little bit more information about their expectations and how they can fit into the task force. And lastly, we are working on our next report to Congress. The last one that covers fiscal years 18 and 19 just completed its leadership review. So now we're getting ready to roll out the next one for 20 and 21. Okay, on the prevention subcommittee, I already mentioned some of the work and the great work you're working on with the Western Regional Panel, but just a couple of others that are worth mentioning would be that they continue to explore opportunities to make species importation data electronically available. Again, working with the appropriate agencies to see how we can go about that. Also exciting is that we have been able to secure funding for a gap analysis for invasive species pathways to determine where prevention measures may be lacking. So that is something that is going to be done in coordination between the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Prevention Subcommittee, and the U.S. Geological Survey. So we're looking at some potential end products that could be something along the lines of an analysis for the current state of AIS prevention, as well as recommendations to fill any gaps in those prevention measures. And the last one I just want to mention here is the Seaplane risk assessment. Some of you may be familiar that this year we did issue a request for proposals in order to hire someone to do a real deep dive into seaplanes to figure out if they are a vector for invasive species and what potential mitigation measures could be recommended to help control that pathway. Right now we have reviewed the proposals. A recommendation has been made to Fish and Wildlife leadership. I do expect a final decision on that within the next week or so. And then hopefully we'll be able to begin work on that project later this year. Okay, moving on to the Early Detection Rapid Response Subcommittee. They do have quite a bit of work that is ongoing. The first is that subcommittee is assisting the U.S. Geological Survey in developing a capacity building program for the NAS database that will address stakeholder needs through development of new detection and assessment tools. They're also working with USGS and the Fish and Wildlife to conduct a horizon scanning that is focused on organisms in trade as well as in transportation pathways. We are hoping as part of that project, they will begin to develop some watch lists. That subcommittee is also working very closely with the National Invasive Species Council on two projects. The first one is developing a report describing available tools for interpretation of eDNA detection patterns. And the second one is looking at a model for the establishment of an emergency response fund. So both of those projects are in those final stages. And again, hopefully something we'll see complete later this year. And lastly, the Early Detection Rapid Response Committee is looking into the value and need for increased incident command system. So right now they're just scoping to see what would be of value to the states and others. And again, they're exploring the possibility of maybe looking at putting out some guidance or some training, but still very early in its development. All right, the control subcommittee, I already mentioned much of the work that involves the species management plans. But a couple other things they are looking at is they're compiling information on the use of genetic-based tools for ANS control. They're also working very closely with the research subcommittee to identify gaps for control measures are either lacking or non-existent for certain control measures to develop. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Basically looking at for where there is gaps in control measures and looking at possible entities that could be put into place to address those gaps. All right, wrapping up here, skipped over the research subcommittee. Research committee has had a very busy year with drafting a national AIS research priorities list. That draft was presented to the task force at the last meeting in June. We then set out with comments. Right now we are just walking through the final comments received on that, and we are preparing the final draft for task force approval at the November meeting. Once we do get that list approved, the next steps for this subcommittee are to develop a communication plan to promote the research priorities, as well as developing a tracking system to track any ongoing progress on those priorities and make sure that those results are communicated. And last but not least, we have the outreach subcommittee. So some of their main focus here is first, they also did put out a request for proposals earlier this year in order to conduct an assessment of national outreach efforts that target outdoor recreational users. So I'm happy to announce that that has been awarded. We had a meeting just this week with the contractor who will be working on this, discussing some ideas and getting that work moved forward. And again, as already previously mentioned, that contractor is going to be working very closely with the Western Regional Panel Project that is assessing state and local outreach campaigns. A couple other things here, just very briefly. The subcommittee is also working on expanding the Stop Aquatic Hitchhiker website, developing a clearinghouse for outreach materials. Already mentioned, we are beginning to lay the groundwork to establish a national outreach community of practice. And finally, the subcommittee will be drafting fact sheets and briefing templates to communicate the task force accomplishments and priorities. All right, and with that, again, a lot of information very quickly. Briefly, here is just our strategic plan one more time with the outcomes we hope to achieve. And I will end with my contact information. Again, if you do want any more information about the task force or to view the work plans or the strategic plans or any document in more detail, they are up on the website. Look for our new website later this November. And again, we do continue to put out a weekly newsletter. So if you'd like to subscribe to that, there is a button at the very bottom of that newsletter. I don't think I mentioned our next meeting will be in November, November 16th through the 18th. Again, it will be a virtual meeting, open to anyone to participate, and that information to register should be up on the website shortly. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Dennis.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Looks like we have a question from Linda Shaw regarding NOAA's participation in the prevention gap analysis group and with EDRR. What level of participation does NOAA have, if any? And if they're not, why not?
Well, that is something that we just received the funding for. So I don't know if it has been really started to be implemented yet. I do believe that there was kind of a request sent out for anyone who would like to participate in that project. At this time, I do not think there is anyone from NOAA who is represented on the Early Detection Rapid Response Subcommittee. But again, that is open to any members who would like to participate. So I would suggest I will reach out to Debbie Lee, who is our new NOAA co-chair, maybe to send out a request to her contacts within NOAA to see if there's anyone who might be interested and willing to participate in that effort.
Great, thank you. And thank you for keeping us updated and all the great work on, the progress that's been made just even of late has been really impressive with the strategic plan and now aspects of all the different working groups. And I know we have a lot of Western Regional panel members that are active participants in these working groups and subcommittees. So really thanks to our members, but thank you to you as well. And one thing I'd like to do as we continue to move forward with our recommendations, trying to make those mesh with the goals and objectives of the different committees and working groups. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll get to see you in the spring, maybe.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed.
All right, thank you, Susan. Going to turn it over to our very own Stephen Phillips, the infamous Quagazar, to give us an update on legislative happenings. So Stephen, I think I'm just going to turn it over to Leah to be the presenter. If that's right, I can't find her. Where's that? Leah, I don't see you on as a participant anymore. Oh, there you go.
Oh, look.
Look at that, Stephen, you got your stuff.
It's
All right.
magic.
Well, go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you.
Turn it over to you.
Hey, folks. Sorry we can't meet in person. This is your legislative update for 2021. Next slide, please. A little background on Pacific States. We started our AAS program in 1999. We mostly work on zebra and quagga mussels, so do ballast water, green crab, and whatever else pops up. PSMFC staff that work on the project include our GIS manager, Van Hare, Kate Sherman, who does the European green crab GIS platform, and then my assistant, Paula Hodling, which she knows pretty much everything that's going on. So if you can't get a hold of me, you can contact her. We couldn't do any of this work without our staff contractors extraordinaire, Lisa Debricare, Quagga Dealey, LL, and Robin Drawheim. And you can see our funding agencies down there, with special thanks to Fish and Wildlife Service and Bonneville Power Administration. Next slide, please. There's the PSMFC website. If you go to that website, we do track federal legislation. Robin Drawheim puts together a spreadsheet. And so you go to Western AIS and see the legislature regulations tab, and then you'll see for the 117th Congress, Excel spreadsheet, AIS legislative tracker. You'll also notice on that tab that there is a new worded tab that Robin and I put together that has all of the legislative language from WRDA, WRDA, OEA, and WIN, all 4 versions of the Water Resources Development Act. Hopefully, when time allows, we'll get all the appropriations information for WRDA up on that page as well. Next slide, please. Okay, let's go through some of the bills that have been introduced. Some of these are going to go places, others aren't. So Lake Tahoe Restoration Act, very near and dear to our chair, Dennis Abaglo. This usually gets passed in one form or another. It has invasive species language in it, so that will probably move forward. The next one you see is Cruz Gomer, Saving America's Vulnerable Endangered Species Act, SAVES Act. If it's a non-native critter introduced in the U.S., try to put it on the Endangered Species Act list. That can be problematic, so these folks don't want that to happen. Probably not going anywhere. Now, the next two, Civilian Climate Corps Act and 21st Century Conservation Corps Act. Both of these are wrapped up in the, I'll just call it the infrastructure reconciliation discussions that are going on right now. Whether these make it into the final package, and we'll get to that more at the end of the talk, I don't know. There's been some pushback from the Republicans on this. So we'll see what happens with this. But if they're out there doing these projects, invasive species, as is highlighted at the bottom, is going to be one of the projects they do. So that's a benefit. Next slide, please. Another bill from Senator Whitehouse, Safeguarding America's Future Environment Act, or SAFE Act. Again, extreme weather and climate change, as you've seen from many bills, is the norm of the day. Invasive species are mentioned in this bill, so that's good. Next one down is Levin and Gosar. They pretty much have the same bill, but because they don't get along very well, there's two different bills. But what this will do is for renewable energy on public land, they're going to set up a fund, and out of that fund, there will be money deposited for sportsmen and conservation purposes. So that's good. Again, that's the type of thing where invasive species projects could be carried out. Next slide, please. Our good friend from Alaska, Don Young, just about every year, every Congress, he or Murkowski or Sullivan introduce some type of genetically engineered salmon act. They want to make sure that consumers know if they're getting one of these modified salmon, more or less it's an inferior product to the great salmon, wild-caught salmon you get out of Alaska. I believe Aqua Advantage salmon now is on the market, and it's being grown, I think, not only in the US, but they may be doing it in Brazil too. So it's happening. I haven't seen it in my supermarket, so I don't know the status of that. Next one, please. So the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee, Raul Grijalva, has introduced this Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act. This is a big bill, couple hundred pages long, lots of money. But in there are some interesting things like Section 302, caught in the sea. And this also helps brings NOAA in, which is great. And this is for marketing and promoting consumption of, and you see down there as it's highlighted, invasive species. So things that come to mind are, of course, lionfish, and also perhaps Asian carp. Also, there is in the coastal science and assessment section, there's interdisciplinary coastal resilience research on developing new commercial and recreational fisheries resources targeting invasive and range expanding species. This one has action on it. It was passed out of committee 23-19 in the House along party lines. We'll probably see more of this one again. Next, please. Lacey Act amendments of 2021 introduced by Senator Rubio, S626. As you may recall, if you follow Lacey Act politics and court cases, part of the Lacey Act was stripped out by the U.S. ARC litigation, and especially on the interstate transportation portion, this would put that back in. This is supported by groups like the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and others that want to see more strength put back into the Lacey Act. It was introduced in March, and since then, no action. So we'll see what happens with this one going forward. Probably no action in this calendar year, perhaps next year. Next, please. Recovering America's Wildlife Act. This is one of the big ones. This has been in, I think this is the third Congress that this has been introduced. It has 117 co-sponsors in the House. I think that may have gone up to 119, and I just saw that 5 more senators signed on to S2372 to make it 9. So this bill's got a lot of juice. It would put a lot of money into state fish and wildlife and tribal agency fish and wildlife programs, and the money can be spent on invasive species. They have had a subcommittee hearing on it. When I checked, I didn't see it coming out of subcommittee. It will. I'm assuming it'll get passed out of the House. This may be, it might not be this year, but maybe next year, this is the time it'll be passed. I think we got a really good shot at this one. Next, please. So as you remember, because you were paying attention last year and the year before, perhaps, S2975 was introduced by Senator Bennett from Colorado. We, our NISA legislative group, worked on this. Elizabeth Brown was part of the lead on this. And the Stop the Spread of Invasive Mussels Act basically brings Bureau of Reclamation into the cost share for watercraft inspection, expands some watercraft inspection and decontamination authority. You'll see down there mandatory inspections and decontaminations could be put into place. It's not law. So at Lake Mead, they may do these things, not must do these things. And we tried to get stronger language so that may, we wanted must, but and that didn't work. So we got what we got, and that was last year. It never got passed, but this year it's about to be reintroduced. There's probably going to be 2 different bills. So and one of them may be introduced on Monday, and that's all I'm allowed to say. So stand by, and you look in our, when the AS news comes out in 2 weeks, there will be further information, probably on the House bill. The Senate bill may be a little bit longer, but we've been working with the different offices on this, and I think in the end, it's all going to be good. It will help expand some of the watercraft capability of different agencies and the cost share, and should end up for some more funding for all of us. Next slide, please. Now, this is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the $1.2 trillion bill, HR 3684. This has come out of the Senate. It's come out of the House. It's in deep politics right now. And the thing for you salmon people is there, thanks to the Northwest Congressional Delegation, there's $1 billion in there for culvert removal. This kind of goes back to a court decision, especially for Washington State, where a lot of culverts need to be removed. And also gives money to the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund, which a lot of fish and wildlife agencies depend on, and then also Coastal Zone Management Program. There is invasive species language in there, some for transportation, an establishment of a competitive grant program, and then section 11522, invasive plant elimination program, federal aid highways, $50 million for 5 years. Next slide, please. Continuing along, it sets up this ecosystem restoration for the Forest Service, $200 million split between Interior and USDA for invasive species detection and prevention. Further down, multi-benefit projects to improve watershed health. Again, it includes protection against invasive species. This bill has passed the House. It has passed the Senate, but now it's in the cluster of awaiting the FY22 budget negotiations, and I'll talk about that next. Next slide, please. So now let's get to appropriations for FY22. We haven't gone that far, but we've started. Next slide, please. For the Fish and Wildlife Service, the numbers are good. The increase, if you remember, after FY19 into FY20, we got a big jump in aquatic invasive species for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And just to back up a little, if you want to see more of this language, it's in westernas.org news. The AAS news, the July 15 issue has all the details. I left out NOAA, USGS, and BIA. But here, for Fish and Wildlife Service, those are the numbers. The numbers are up again in the House, and a lot of times the House mark will win the day. So Asian carp at 26 million, you see the little red plus sign there. That means it's increased from the last budget. State AS plans has gone up. National Invasive Species Act is the same as it was. Prevent the spread of QZs in the West, that's gone up a little bit. Lake Tahoe, that has gone up. Great Lakes Sea Lamprey Administration, that is state flat funded. So this was passed out of the House along party votes, along with 7 other bills. So the House part of the appropriations for Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service, that's completed. Now they're waiting on the Senate and then the true sausage making when they go to conference committee. Next, please. Another big program for the West, the quote unquote WRDA Energy and Water Appropriations for the Corps of Engineers. The numbers are pretty similar to what we've seen the last couple of years. Watercraft inspection stations went from 15 up to 17 million, monitoring at 3 million. And then there's money in there again, though they don't give the amount here because that's a Senate thing, for monitoring, survey, and control of flowering rush and hydrilla. The hydrilla verticulate, that is a type error. Also, a note in the report language on San Justo Reservoir, which if some of you forgotten about, was infested in 2008, and it's 2021. So it'd be really nice if we would, all of us, and BOR, get in and let's get this thing cleaned up. It's been 13 years. It's time to get San Justo, and we bring this up and we're going to say, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we can get rid of the mussel population in San Justo? Yeah. And there's so much money floating around right now, I think we can do it. So I'm glad to see this, and I think this may help staff on the ground get this thing done, or at least give it the best try they can. Next slide, please. So now we're on appropriations in the Senate and energy. They're on 8/4/21. The committee reported out these agencies. Of those agencies, we're interested in energy and water development because it's WRDA and the cost share watercraft inspection program. Next slide, please. So we can see that there's $1 million in there for flowering rush and hydrilla, $15 million for watercraft inspection stations, and $3 million for monitoring. If I had to guess, you can probably see there's a difference between the House and the Senate. We'll probably end up with $17 million versus 15, but that'll all come out in the wash. Good news is that it's still funded. Next slide, please. So now what's going to happen? In the near term, you've probably seen, and you may have gotten a memo from the administration if you're a federal worker, possibility of government shutdown. We need to raise the debt limit. There's emergency disaster funding. There's also the FY22 federal budget and reconciliation project. And then there's the infrastructure investment and Jobs Act. That's the $1.2 trillion million. I did see this changes every day. Every day this week, the message has changed on what they're going to do with this gigantic sausage making effort. It looks like on Monday, they're going to vote on the Infrastructure Act. So we'll see. I think they still got some issues with the reconciliation package. So, but in the end, they'll get it done. It's just going to take a little bit. And in terms of the government shutdown, I'd go 80-20, the government's going to stay open. I don't think it's going to shut down this year. But don't hold me to that. Longer term over this year, then going into next, and some of these bills got those Bennett bills I described before that are going to be reintroduced. We got the RAWA bill. We're hoping Lacey will see some light, and that I know some folks are pushing it. And then that Natural Resources Committee, Grigleva bill, Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act, I think that's probably gonna see some light. There's a lot of stuff in there. The invasives is just a tiny little bit. So again, next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, go back. Stay tuned. If you don't get the aquatic invasive species news, shoot me an email and I'll add you to the list. We do track legislation in that. And then also on the website, Robin tracks the legislation. We don't track appropriations at this time, just the bills. Okay, so the other part of the presentation. Lisa couldn't make it today. We have over actually a long period of time through the Columbia River Basin team and through the Western Regional Panel tried to get a better handle on commercially hauled vehicles coming across the United States, both up from the Southwest and from the Great Lakes. These are the numbers that Lisa recently put together from 2012 to 2022 in terms of the sources of boats that have come into the 5-state region, the four, Wyoming, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And the two big blips, as usual, to the left there, that's Southwest, Colorado River, but with the red circle there, that's the Great Lakes. And Montana especially runs into a lot of Great Lakes boats. And Tom Wolf has been a very strong advocate, and I congratulate him on keeping this on our radar. We need to do a better job of communicating with the hauler and small hauler, just not the big guys, but the mom and pops about, hey, if you bring your boat into Montana and some of these other states, they're going to stop you and maybe slow down your trip. So we're re-engaging and trying to figure out a better communication method to get to the hauler community. Next slide, please. So many of you remember and still probably use the squeal on pigs. It's an 800 number. You see a pig, you call the number. Rick Boatner shows up in his black helicopter and deals with the problem. So this is shown that it works. So next slide, please. So then the idea is, can we set something up similarly for haulers? And this is going to require, and so our whiskey group, our state Western invasive species group, with their watercraft inspection programs, we've been discussing this over the last 45 days, 2 months, how the best way is to do the outreach. We would like to get into the transportation departments so that if somebody gets a permit for taking out a load, that they would get one of these messages saying, hey, if you call this number, you can make your trip through these inspection stations a lot easier. Over the long, some of us have been working with these transportation departments for coming up on 20 years now, and they're different agencies. They've got a mission that's, invasive species is not at the top of their list. So we're going to continue working through this. And with Fish and Wildlife Service funding, we're going to come up with something to help this. And it's been pointed out in one of the calls we had recently, yeah, some of the larger guys kind of know about this. It's still the smaller guys that we have to get, and also the online sales, the Craigslist sales. So this is actually very exciting. It's gonna, I think in the end, it may take a while, but we can continue to try to get the information out from a significant source of fouled watercraft. Next slide, please. And that's it. There's my email. There's Lisa's email if you want to weigh in on the hauler project. Always visit our website at westernas.org. And there's a picture of my backyard. Thank you. And I'll take questions, maybe.
Doesn't look like we have any. But thank you, Stephen.
Yo.
It's always, I'm just impressed by your ability to track all this stuff. It's super complicated, political often at times, obviously. But thank you. It's really important to have all this engagement with our decision makers. It often means money, sometimes authorities as well, but money makes our world go around, obviously. So really appreciate all your attention on this and your deftness. It's
yeah, and thanks to you, Dennis, and your leadership and all of the NISA group. And it's not only us, it's also we get help from the Mississippi Basin folks as well and East Coast folks. But we've done a good partnership back in DC to get some work done. So thank you all.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get back there soon in person.
Be nice.
All right. Let's see. Just some comments. Stephen, your cat is a cattle herder? Question. And where's your big fish picture?
Oh. Well, you know what? There was a halibut opener today. And I'm not there. Why? Because I'm here. But I'd much rather be here with you fine people.
And Nick is suggesting we grab 1888 AIS boat for the hotline if it's available. 247-2628.
Oh, good one. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think before we adjourn, we have to take any public comment, and not seeing any. And if I'm not sure how that would come about, Leah, but I'm not seeing any in the questions or the chat.
Yeah, I think if anybody has anything they want to put on the table, now's your last 2 seconds before we close out. So quickly, I would put that in there. That's your chance.
We'll give people a moment to do that. And I guess while we're waiting, I'll just start closing everything out. Again, much thanks for all your participation and attention. A lot of great presentations, and thank you again to our presenters and facilitators, moderators, and the planning team that made this happen. And to Stephen for the funding to allow this platform to be utilized. I think it's been pretty effective, even though we'd much rather be in person, myself included. This is a pretty good outcome and a great turnout. So thanks, everyone. And not seeing any public comment. Have a good weekend. Go have a drink. Get outside, breathe some fresh air if you've got it. And we'll hopefully see you in person soon. Thanks, everyone.